Section 52 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Moyer. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 3. Section 52. The Napoleon of the People, from The Country Doctor, by Honoré de Balzac, Part 2. Here the narrator nimbly described a circle with his foot on the floor of the barn. And Napoleon said, "There, that's to be a kingdom," and a kingdom it was. Ha! the good times! The colonels were generals, the generals marshals, and the marshals kings. There's one of 'em still on his throne to prove it to Europe, but he's a Gascon and a traitor to France for keeping that crown, and he doesn't blush for shame as he ought to do, because crowns, don't you see, are made of gold. I who am speaking to you, I have seen in Paris 11 kings and a mob of princes surrounding Napoleon like the rays of the sun. You understand, of course, that every soldier had the chance to mount a throne, provided always he had the merit. So a corporal of the guard was a sight to be looked at as he walked along, for each man had his share in the victory, and 'twas plainly set forth in the bulletin. What victories they were! Austerlitz, where the army manoeuvred as if on parade; Eylau, where we drowned the Russians in a lake as though Napoleon had blown them into it with the breath of his mouth; Wagram, where the army fought for 3 days without grumbling. We won as many battles as there are saints in the calendar. It was proved then beyond a doubt that Napoleon had the sword of God in his scabbard. The soldiers were his friends, he made them his children. He looked after us, he saw that we had shoes and shirts and greatcoats and bread and cartridges. But he always kept up his majesty, for don't you see, 'twas his business to reign. No matter for that, however, a sergeant and even a common soldier could say to him, "My emperor," just as you say to me sometimes, "My good friend." He gave us an answer if we appealed to him. He slept in the snow like the rest of us. And indeed he had almost the air of a human man. I who speak to you, I have seen him with his feet among the grape shot, and no more uneasy than you are now, standing steady, looking through his field glass and minding his business. 'Twas that kept the rest of us quiet. I don't know how he did it, but when he spoke he made our hearts burn within us, and to show him we were his children, incapable of balking, didn't we rush at the mouths of the rascally cannon that belched and vomited shot and shell without so much as saying, "Look out"? Why, the dying must needs raise their heads to salute him, and cry, "Long live the emperor!" I ask you, was that natural? Would they have done that for a human man? Well, after he had settled the world, the Empress Josephine, his wife, a good woman all the same, managed matters so that she did not bear him any children, and he was obliged to give her up, though he loved her considerably. But, you see, he had to have little ones for reasons of state. Hearing of this, all the sovereigns of Europe quarrelled as to which of them should give him a wife. And he married, so they told us, an Austrian archduchess, daughter of Caesar, an ancient man about whom people talk a good deal, and not in France only, where any one will tell you what he did, but in Europe. It is all true, for I myself who address you at this moment, I have been on the Danube, and have seen the remains of a bridge built by that man, who, it seems, was a relation of Napoleon in Rome, and that's how the emperor got the inheritance of that city for his son. So, after the marriage, which was a fête for the whole world, and in honor of which he released the people of 10 years' taxes, which they had to pay all the same, however, because the assessors didn't take account of what he said, his wife had a little one, who was king of Rome. Now, there's a thing that had never been seen on this earth. Never before was a child born a king with his father living. On that day a balloon went up in Paris to tell the news to Rome, and that balloon made the journey in 1 day. Now, is there any man among you who will stand up and declare to me that all that was human? No, it was written above, and may the scurvy seize them who deny that he was sent by God himself for the triumph of France. Well, here's the Emperor of Russia, that used to be his friend. He gets angry because Napoleon didn't marry a Russian, so he joins with the English, our enemies, to whom our emperor always wanted to say a couple of words in their boroughs, only he was prevented. Napoleon gets angry too. An end had to be put to such doings. So he says to us, "Soldiers, you have been masters of every capital in Europe except Moscow, which is now the ally of England. To conquer England and India, which belongs to the English, it becomes our peremptory duty to go to Moscow." Then he assembled the greatest army that ever trailed its gaiters over the globe, and so marvelously in hand it was that he reviewed 1,000,000 of men in 1 day. "Hurrah!" cried the Russians. Down came all Russia and those animals of Cossacks in a flock. 'Twas nation against nation, a general hurly-burly, and beware who could. Asia against Europe, as the Red Man had foretold to Napoleon. "Enough!" cried the emperor, "I'll be ready." So now, sure enough, came all the kings, as the Red Man had said, to lick Napoleon's hand. Austria, Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, Poland, Italy, every one of them were with us, flattering us. Ah, it was fine! The eagles never cawed so loud as at those parades, perched high above the banners of all Europe. The Poles were bursting with joy because Napoleon was going to release them, and that's why France and Poland are brothers to this day. "Russia is ours!" cried the army. We plunged into it well supplied. We marched and we marched. No Russians. At last we found the brutes entrenched on the banks of the Moskova. That's where I won my cross, and I've got the right to say it was a damnable battle. This was how it came about. The emperor was anxious. He had seen the Red Man, who said to him, "My son, you are going too fast for your feet. You will lack men. Friends will betray you." So the emperor offered peace. But before signing, "Let us drub those Russians," he said to us. "Done!" cried the army. "Forward march!" said the sergeants. My clothes were in rags, my shoes worn out from trudging along those roads, which are very uncomfortable ones, but no matter. I said to myself, as it's the last of our earthquakings, I'll go into it tooth and nail. We were drawn up in line before the great ravine, front seats as 'twere. Signal given, and 700 pieces of artillery began a conversation that would bring the blood from your ears. Then, must do justice to one's enemies, the Russians let themselves be killed like Frenchmen. They wouldn't give way, we couldn't advance. "Forward!" someone cried, "here comes the emperor." True enough. He passed at a gallop, waving his hand to let us know we must take the redoubt. He inspired us. On we ran. I was the first in the ravine. Ha! My God, how the lieutenants fell, and the colonels, and the soldiers! No matter. all the more shoes for those that had none, and epaulets for the clever ones who knew how to read. "Victory!" cried the whole line. "Victory!" And, would you believe it, a thing never seen before, there lay 25,000 Frenchmen on the ground. 'Twas like mowing down a wheat field, only in place of the ears of wheat put the heads of men. We were sobered by this time, those who were left alive. The man rode up. We made a circle round him. Ha! He knew how to cajole his children. He could be amiable when he liked, and feed 'em with words when their stomachs were ravenous with the hunger of wolves. Flatterer! He distributed the crosses himself, he uncovered to the dead, and then he cried to us, "On to Moscow!" "To Moscow!" answered the army. We took Moscow. Would you believe it? The Russians burned their own city. 'Twas a haystack 6 miles square, and it blazed for 2 days. The buildings crashed like slates, and showers of melted iron and lead rained down upon us, which was naturally horrible. I may say to you plainly, it was like a flash of lightning on our disasters. The emperor said, "We have done enough. My soldiers shall rest here." So we rested a while, just to get the breath into our bodies and the flesh on our bones, for we were really tired. We took possession of the golden cross that was on the Kremlin, and every soldier brought away with him a small fortune. But out there the winter sets in a month earlier, a thing those fools of science didn't properly explain. So, coming back, the cold nipped us. No longer an army. Do you hear me? No longer any generals, no longer any sergeants even. 'Twas the reign of wretchedness and hunger, a reign of equality at last. No one thought of anything but to see France once more. No one stooped to pick up his gun or his money if he dropped them. Each man followed his nose and went as he pleased without caring for glory. The weather was so bad, the emperor couldn't see his star. There was something between him and the skies. Poor man, it made him ill to see his eagles flying away from victory. Ah, 'twas a mortal blow, you may believe me. Well, we got to the Beresina. My friends, I can affirm to you by all that is most sacred, by my honor, that since mankind came into the world, never, never was there seen such a fricassee of an army. Guns, carriages, artillery wagons, in the midst of such snows, under such relentless skies. The muzzles of the muskets burned our hands if we touched them, the iron was so cold. It was there that the army was saved by the pontonniers, who were firm at their post, and there that Gondrin, sole survivor of the men who were bold enough to go into the water and build the bridges by which the army crossed, that Gondrin, here present, admirably conducted himself, and saved us from the Russians, who, I must tell you, still respected the Grand Army, remembering its victories. And, he added, pointing to Gondrin, who was gazing at him with the peculiar attention of a deaf man, "Gondrin is a finished soldier, a soldier who is honor itself, and he merits your highest esteem." I saw the emperor, he resumed, standing by the bridge, motionless, not feeling the cold. Was that human? He looked at the destruction of his treasure, his friends, his old Egyptians. Bah! All that passed him, women, army wagons, artillery, all were shattered, destroyed, ruined. The bravest carried the eagles, for the eagles, d'ye see, were France, the nation, all of you. They were the civil and the military honor that must be kept pure. Could their heads be lowered because of the cold? It was only near the emperor that we warmed ourselves, because when he was in danger we ran, frozen as we who wouldn't have stretched a hand to save a friend. They told us he wept at night over his poor family of soldiers. Ah, none but he and Frenchmen could have got themselves out of that business. We did get out, but with losses, great losses, as I tell you. The Allies captured our provisions. Men began to betray him, as the Red Man predicted. Those chatterers in Paris, who had held their tongues after the Imperial Guard was formed, now thought he was dead. So they hoodwinked the prefect of police and hatched a conspiracy to overthrow the empire. He heard of it. It worried him. He left us, saying, "Adieu, my children, guard the outposts, I shall return to you." Bah! Without him nothing went right. The generals lost their heads, the marshals talked nonsense and committed follies. But that was not surprising, for Napoleon, who was kind, had fed 'em on gold. They had got as fat as lard, and wouldn't stir. Some stayed in camp when they ought to have been warming the backs of the enemy who was between us and France. But the emperor came back, and he brought recruits, famous recruits. He changed their backbone and made 'em dogs of war, fit to set their teeth into anything. And he brought a guard of honor, a fine body indeed. All bourgeois, who melted away like butter on a gridiron. Well, spite of our stern bearing, here's everything going against us, and yet the army did prodigies of valor. Then came battles on the mountains, nations against nations. Dresden, Lutzen, Bautzen. Remember these days, all of you, for 'twas then that Frenchmen were so particularly heroic that a good grenadier only lasted 6 months. We triumphed always, yet there were those English in our rear, rousing revolts against us with their lies. No matter, we cut our way home through the whole pack of the nations. Wherever the emperor showed himself, we followed him, for if, by sea or land, he gave us the word go, we went. At last we were in France, and many a poor foot soldier felt the air of his own country restore his soul to satisfaction, spite of the wintry weather. I can say for myself that it refreshed my life. Well, next, our business was to defend France, our country, our beautiful France, against all Europe, which resented our having laid down the law to the Russians, and pushed them back into their dens so that they couldn't eat us up alive, as northern nations, who are dainty and like southern flesh, have a habit of doing. At least, so I've heard some generals say. Then the emperor saw his own father-in-law, his friends whom he had made kings, and the scoundrels to whom he had given back their thrones, all against him. Even Frenchmen and allies in our own ranks turned against us under secret orders, as at the Battle of Leipzig. Would common soldiers have been capable of such wickedness? 3 times a day were men false to their word, and they called themselves princes. So, then, France was invaded. Wherever the emperor showed his lion face, the enemy retreated, and he did more prodigies in defending France than ever he had done in conquering Italy, the East, Spain, Europe, and Russia. He meant to bury every invader under the sod, and teach him to respect the soil of France. So he let them get to Paris, that he might swallow them at a mouthful, and rise to the height of his genius in a battle greater than all the rest, a mother battle, as 'twere. But there, the Parisians were afraid for their twopenny skins and their trumpery shops. They opened the gates. Then the ragusades began, and happiness ended. The empress was fooled, and the white banner flaunted from the windows. The generals, whom he had made his nearest friends, abandoned him for the Bourbons, a set of people no one had heard tell of. The emperor bade us farewell at Fontainebleau. Soldiers! I can hear him now. We wept like children. The flags and the eagles were lowered as if for a funeral. It was, I may well say it to you, it was the funeral of the empire. Her dapper armies were nothing now but skeletons. So he said to us, standing there on the portico of his palace, "My soldiers, we are vanquished by treachery, but we shall meet in heaven, the country of the brave. Defend my child, whom I commit to you. Long live Napoleon II." He meant to die, that no man should look upon Napoleon vanquished. He took poison, enough to have killed a regiment, because, like Jesus Christ before his passion, he thought himself abandoned of God and his talisman. But the poison did not hurt him. See again, he found he was immortal. Sure of himself, knowing he must ever be the emperor, he went for a while to an island to study out the nature of these others, who, you may be sure, committed follies without end. Whilst he bided his time down there, the Chinese, and the wild men on the coast of Africa, and the Barbary States, and others who are not at all accommodating, knew so well he was more than man that they respected his tent, saying to touch it would be to offend God. Thus, d'ye see, when these others turned him from the doors of his own France, he still reigned over the whole world. Before long he embarked in the same little cockle shell of a boat he had had in Egypt, sailed round the beard of the English, set foot in France, and France acclaimed him. The sacred cuckoo flew from spire to spire. All France cried out with one voice, "Long live the Emperor!" In this region here, the enthusiasm for that wonder of the ages was, I may say, solid. Delphine behaved well, and I am particularly pleased to know that her people wept when they saw once more the grey overcoat. March 1st it was when Napoleon landed with 200 men to conquer that kingdom of France and of Navarre, which on the 20th of the same month was again the French Empire. On that day our man was in Paris. He had made a clean sweep, recovered his dear France, and gathered his veterans together by saying no more than 3 words: "I am here." 'Twas the greatest miracle God had yet done. Before him did ever man recover an empire by showing his hat? And these others, who thought they had subdued France, not they. At sight of the eagles a national army sprang up, and we marched to Waterloo. There the Guard died at one blow. Napoleon, in despair, threw himself 3 times before the cannon of the enemy without obtaining death. We saw that. The battle was lost. That night the emperor called his old soldiers to him. On the field soaked with our blood he burned his banner and his eagles. His poor eagles, ever victorious, who cried forward in the battles, and had flown the length and breadth of Europe, they were saved the infamy of belonging to the enemy. All the treasures of England couldn't get her a tail feather of them. No more eagles. The rest is well known. The red man went over to the Bourbons, like the scoundrel that he is. France is crushed. The soldier is nothing. They deprive him of his dues. They discharge him to make room for broken down nobles. Ah, 'tis pitiable. They seized Napoleon by treachery. The English nailed him on a desert island in mid-ocean on a rock raised 10,000 feet above the earth, and there he is and will be till the red man gives him back his power for the happiness of France. These others say he's dead. Ha! Dead! 'Tis easy to see they don't know him. They tell that fib to catch the people, and feel safe in their hovel of a government. Listen, the truth at the bottom of it all is that his friends have left him alone on the desert island to fulfill a prophecy. For I forgot to say that his name, Napoleon, means lion of the desert. Now this that I tell you is true as the gospel. All other tales that you hear about the emperor are follies without common sense. Because, d'ye see, God never gave to child of woman born the right to stamp his name in red as he did on the earth, which for ever shall remember him. Long live Napoleon, the father of his people and of the soldier. Long live General Eble, cried the pontonnier. How happened it you were not killed in the ravine at Moskova? Asked a peasant woman. How do I know? We went in a regiment, we came out 100 foot soldiers. None but the lines were capable of taking that redoubt. The infantry, d'ye see, that's the real army. And the cavalry, what of that? Cried Genestas, letting himself roll from the top of the hay, and appearing to us with a suddenness which made the bravest utter a cry of terror. Eh, my old veteran, you forgot the red lancers of Poniatowski, the cuirassiers, the dragoons, they that shook the earth when Napoleon, impatient that the victory was delayed, said to Murat, Sire, cut them in two. Ha! We were off, first at a trot, then at a gallop. 1, 2, and the enemy's line was cut in halves like an apple with a knife. A charge of cavalry, my old hero! Why, 'tis a column of cannon balls. How about the pontonniers? Cried Gondrin. My children, said Genestas, becoming suddenly quite ashamed of his sortie when he saw himself in the midst of a silent and bewildered group, there are no spies here. See, take this and drink to the little corporal. Long live the emperor! Cried all the people present with one voice. Hush, my children, said the officer, struggling to control his emotion. Hush! He is dead. He died saying glory, France, and battle. My friends, he had to die. But his memory, never. Gogla made a gesture of disbelief. Then he said in a low voice to those nearest, The officer is still in the service, and he's told to tell the people the emperor is dead. We mustn't be angry with him, because, d'ye see, a soldier has to obey orders. As Genestas left the barn, he heard the Fosseuse say, That officer is a friend of the emperor and of Monsieur Benassis. On that, all the people rushed to the door to get another sight of him, and by the light of the moon they saw the doctor take his arm. I committed a great folly, said Genestas. Let us get home quickly. Those eagles, the cannon, the campaigns, I no longer knew where I was. What do you think of my Gogla? Asked Benassis. Monsieur, so long as such tales are told, France will carry in her entrails the 14 armies of the Republic, and may at any time renew the conversation of cannon with all Europe. That's my opinion. End of section 52.